Many months later.
So then he joined the French, and he got he was like their number one ace fighter pilot. And afterwards, he became a bouncer and in France, and some Nazi people related, whatever, he would punch them.
Acceptable
for him.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. So yeah, he did eventually do that too.
Yeah, I like when he was, flying a fighter jet and like actually shooting Nazis. I was like, eh. But when you said he punched them, then I was like, all right, now I'm on board.
See, honestly, there is something about the just punching a Nazi
it's
special. Yeah.
There's the added fuck you. Like, I know who you are and I have a problem with you.
That's it.
No anonymity.
That's the one. It's the lack of anonymity. You're not shooting a plane. You're punching a Nazi. It's still a very big and real thing in France, the Foreign Legion. I think there's a building somewhere in Paris. I think there's one in the south as well, probably near Marseille. Like, everything is near Marseille. And if you go up sort of like with your backpack and say, I want to join the Foreign Legion, and they let you in, that's just how you apply. You just turn up on French territory, walk in, and then they'll take you in. And I think there's probably like a clearance process afterwards, where they check, okay, can you actually run? Ever? And then they do that. But the foundation is just you turn up.
Had me until running. I was like, maybe this could work out. But no.
It's the most drastic attempt to get European citizenship ever. Join the French Foreign Legion.
Before we begin, the Gamers Advocate would like to remind you that any episode could contain game spoilers, so watch or listen with discretion. And now your hosts, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
But speaking of dating apps, welcome on into yet another episode of the Gamers Advocate podcast. We are joined with Banana Hammock Republic, who is in his Eagle shirt today, so by the time you see this, we'll know what happened.
We'll know
with
why
their fate.
He's so pissed off.
And in 3, 2, 1, put up the score.
And we have AMKomnenos, who is not in an Eagles shirt, so he must not like the Eagles. So,
but he is in a Chiefs shirt. He's not.
Okay, it's a Captain America shirt.
Pretty cool.
Would have been very surprised and also very pissed off. Because I know you have friends who are Eagles fans. I don't know if you have any friends who are Chiefs fans.
I do not have a single friend who's a Chiefs fan. Like I said, there was very briefly a Welsh player on the Chiefs practice squad, or their 52-man squad, who then didn't make the cut. And then he went off to the Jacksonville Jaguars, where he proceeded to not make the cut. So I'm a fan of nothing.
Yeah,
Not playing in the NFL.
But anyway, we appreciate everybody being here today. If you like the video so far,
Welcome to the football episode.
Sub to
We
the
have done a
channel.
sports episode.
Weirdly silent.
I'm perfectly willing to do another sports episode because there can never be enough repeat stuff of what we go over because, we always have, things.
I feel like there could be.
Yeah. We could always go over the sports things all over again, or any the subject we go over. So
we could definitely return to quite a few subjects. Yeah. I don't know about specifically football,
sports, but yeah, the lore one. I keep thinking we're going to revisit that one. I'd like to at some point, but the more we know about certain things, like for instance, Com is playing Morrowind right now on Steam and on Twitch, really looking forward to him finishing that so we can really open that book of the lore. So, because he's reading everything, he's playing the game proper. So
let's not overstate it. I'm reading some things. I'm reading the essential quest books. Everything else is going in the pile to be sold later when I find that mud crab.
Yeah. But you're reading a lot more than even most people would, I would say. They probably just skim over it and say, okay, I just need to do this so I can go over there. Well, if you read it, you would have gotten there faster because you went the long way.
I think it's a game that almost enforces some reading. It doesn't mean that you really have to read everything, but I feel without reading anything at all, you're going to really struggle to understand what's going on and why you're doing things. Especially because the journal that will actually ultimately give you the quest summary doesn't always tell you where to go. It'll normally give you a name, it'll normally give you a place, or you might suddenly have a mark on your map you didn't have before. But plenty of times there's been nothing. And there's just, okay, where would I go next? What makes sense? Go back, look at the books, go back, and look what you did last and try and piece that together. It's definitely not a puzzle game by any stretch, but it is a game that requires some investment outside of just, I go from here to there.
Yeah, I love it how when the pieces do fit, they feel, it really feels like you accomplished something in that game because you paid attention. So
yeah. It was particularly enjoyable reading the prophecies and the lost prophecies for the first time and thinking, oh, I've actually done part of this without realizing. And now I've got a path. And there's just something special about the way that that's presented to you. And it's not done with fanfare. It's given to you in a book, and you choose to read the book, and you don't really have to make any massive logical leaps because it's quite literal, the thing you're reading. But it's still on you to read it and say, oh shit, I did that. Oh, I did that. There's no cutscene, there's no triumphant music. You just realize what you did.
Yeah, it's special. Morrowind's very special.
Would you say that it's a hot take? It's peak Bethesda?
Peak Bethesda storytelling for sure. It's their best game they've ever done, easily. But like I said, with all the copies sold of Oblivion, Fallout, and Skyrim.
Of the story aspect. Because I would say that one of the things I've noticed from Com's playthrough is that navigation in that world seems like a colossal pain in the ass. And the way that it's done in Skyrim, which is my most familiar game in that series, feels so obvious that like I'm surprised they didn't figure it out sooner. Like the idea of having markers on your map for everything and then having a waypoint that just tells you kind of the general direction you need to go, or even a compass. Because it really doesn't feel like Morrowind gives you any of that. It's just like, all right, which way am I facing? All right, let's hope I don't get turned around on this 40-mile trek over to my objective.
I think all you've got really is that tiny little square in the corner, which, like you said, gives you roughly your direction and also a faint color outline of what's around you for about 5 feet. And that's it. And except for that, it's just when you get to the hills, turn left, and then at the next one, turn right. And that one in particular,
approximately left.
Yeah, that one in particular was incredible. It was take the fork in the road that goes left. It turns out there's 3 forks in the road. But no, it's the one when you get to the hills. Well, this one's kind of in the hills too, and it's completely wrong.
These are mountains, those are hills, those are plains. The plains are kind of hilly, though.
That's one of the things that I think is quite interesting about it, though. It's the way that the world is designed is a little bit awkward, and I feel it's largely enforced by the way that the game was technologically limited when it came out. So if you look at the way that when I'm playing it, I've got the fog distance that surrounds you, that fog of war. It's about 1.5 times wider than it traditionally is in the base game. Just one of those privileges of playing on a modern engine, you can make it a bit bigger. Mm-hmm. But I found that whenever I put it to 10 times larger than what it used to be, so I could see 10 times further, the game looks like shit. Because it was never designed to be looked at that way. You see how small the world is. You see that everything's right next to each other. But there's a way that they made the world feel bigger, which is, if you think of Skyrim, if you think of the town of Whiterun, where you've got the first big city. Around it, there's a big plain that's flat. Morrowind doesn't really ever have that. It's always, I can follow this road, but there's a mountain to my left, a mountain to my right that I can't get over unless I levitate. And I have to follow this path and be funneled through this area. Because the city is only 300 feet away from me. But we need to make it feel further. And because the player can't see it, we can make them feel like they're going through this long and winding maze. So the navigation, as soon as you take a wrong turn, it's so slow to get back to where you were going because they just couldn't have those wide open spaces where you can just say, oh, is that direction? Super, beeline. Rather, it's, okay, it's that direction. Shit, where's the path? Do I go?
Yeah, I feel like that's one of those things we've talked about before where they kind of embraced limitation and found a way to make it work for their game. And that still kind of exists in Skyrim, but when it happens in Skyrim, you're much more pissed off about it because you're like, oh, the waypoint is telling me I needed to go here, but I need to go like 300 feet below me, and I have no idea how to get down there without falling to my death. Now it's a huge inconvenience. Yeah. Whereas in Morrowind is like, it's kind of an inconvenience, but it's an inconvenience that actually gave you a little bit of guidance.
Yeah. It's the natural physics involved there too, because, if you hike a lot, I've done a ton of hikes and paths. It's like where I need to go is only a mile but I had to take a 4-mile trek to get to that point because the path just wouldn't naturally let me go that way. And
me trying to get anywhere from my my hometown. It's like, oh, I live 7 miles from that, but I have to drive 14 miles out of my way to get to an actual road because I live in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So it just kind of like immerses you in Morrowind because it just follows a natural world issue. But yeah, it's Morrowind is just special for so many reasons. But as far as the map, I mean, I will say that the main map, of course, you have one central data point, which is right in the middle of the map, and everything else happens around it, basically. So there's a big portion of the map you'll never see until later on. So.
Well, that's also an interesting way that they managed to make the game world feel a bit bigger, is the fact that you always have to go around. You're sort of operating on the donut of the world the entire time. That whole central area, if you need to go from the southwest to the northeast of the map, from Sedanin to Tel Vir, I think it is, you can't. You've got to go all the way west around, past Kinesis, past Kul, past the Ashlander camp, and then make your way over, or you've got to go around to the southeast, and that's much further again. If you could just beeline it, or if you use something like the Scroll of Icarian Flight, which gives you that massive jump boost. If you just do that, you can probably just jump there and get there really quick. But they force you to go around. It just makes the game world feel a bit bigger. It's one of those things that it is quite frustrating, especially when you're walking back for the 50th time to go somewhere, and the lack of fast travel outside of the inbuilt in-game travel systems, which now I'm beginning to use a bit more. Things like Divine Intervention to get to the cult, things like, or the temple, I can't remember. Either way, things like Mark and Recall, things like the Silt Striders and the boats. There is the fast travel system, but there does become a point when you realize that so much of Morrowind feels very fetch questy, because fetch quests have always existed. It's not a World of Warcraft thing, despite how much we associate them with them. And there's so much back and forth that the game occasionally feels artificially lengthened, rather than you going on an epic adventure. Sometimes it's just, oh, I've got to lug it all the way back there.
Trying to do this with the least spoilers as possible, but the point of that is that you went to go do that fetch quest, but along the way you encountered this, which was part of the prophecy, which you wouldn't have done just naturally going outside of the main quest of doing what you were doing. But because you fell into that, you actually fell into the prophecy, which is a bigger part of the main quest. So you're doing one quest within the main quest, but you fulfilled another thing accidentally. Well, the game forced it upon you. You just didn't know it at the time.
Although at some point you are just walking between Kul and Balmora for the 5th time for no reason. There's a bit of both. You have the you have the way that it builds the world around your questing. So you go and do a quest, I'm going on this journey, stumble across something, fulfill something, and then there's the times when it's just, I've got to go for a walk again, down a path I've walked before. Again.
I think it's probably as far as like your aesthetics and the clothing and everything, it's probably no other game has ever beat it for skirts. It's the best skirt game ever.
We wear a skirt.
Yeah. I don't know why. They just look good in Morrowind.
That fetch quest thing really, it works in Morrowind in the sense of like, there's a lot filling the space between where you start and where you finish the quest. And when you're a player on your first experience and you're kind of exploring, everything's still a bit new, it works because you're like Legion said, you're kind of learning things, you're fulfilling kind of these prophecies that you don't even realize as you go and play through the game. But if you're doing that kind of repeat playthrough, you kind of reach that point where you're like, oh shit, I have to do that again. I have to do this and I have to do that. And really all I wanted to do was that first thing, but there's so much in the way of getting to the goal of my first quest. So I can definitely see that being a little frustrating, but that first playthrough is probably, maybe not in 2025 or 2024 or whatever when people started playing that. Probably not as magical, but when Morrowind first came out, probably really, really incredible for them to be like, all right, I'm going to go to that town and I'm going to find all of this stuff on the way there. And it's going to be really cool and exciting.
It's not a big critique. Yeah, it's more just it's looking at it from the perspective of 2024, 2025, and the conveniences and quality of life that we've come to expect, and that no longer being in this game. And all of a sudden, the fact that you do have to make this walk again for the 10th time suddenly feels as though you're frustrated that we hadn't stumbled across the idea of just fast traveling this, or of even just not making me go there. Just saying that someone off screen is going to go deliver this letter. Someone off screen is going to go do this thing. Don't worry about it.
I mean, back then we had one monitor, playing a game, and we didn't have a lot of, other things beeping at us and stuff. I mean, we literally had beepers and pagers. But it was our ability to focus on what we were doing in that game. We had a lot less distractions in the outside world. Like I now have a Discord call, or I have an email that pops up, or this and that. We have all these things that are getting in the way, whereas Morrowind was at a time where you didn't really mind that because it was just filling up the time anyway, because what else were you doing?
Weirdly, I think Morrowind is one of those games that almost feels like a perfect size. And I'm not against games getting bigger and bigger within reason, as long as stop it, Banana. As long as we're maintaining that quality control throughout the world, it's fine. The problem is there comes a point when you probably can't. And I don't know where that sweet spot is. It depends on the size of the studio, it depends on the size of the employees, it depends on the time the game's in development, it depends on the ability of the director to actually maintain a consistent vision, not necessarily consistent.
Trouble taking this seriously.
A consistent style.
Depends on the motion of the ocean. We're just getting into euphemisms now.
Morrowind's a grower, not a shower. That's just.
Yep, this is exactly where I thought this was going to end up going.
It wasn't me this time.
This time.
Well, to be fair, when you said, I feel like Morrowind is the perfect size, I was just going to. It just comes back to the joke that I always end up making when we get into a size discussion. I'm just like, it's perfectly adequate with a very defensive tone in my voice.
Yeah, but you actually brought up one before, Com, where you were talking about things that turn you off because of outside things.
What does that have to do with video games?
This was off camera, and it stays off camera.
Yeah.
Well, today, now that we've talked thoroughly about Morrowind and Thieves of Joy, Com has brought up a topic, verbatim, Thieves of Joy. But specifically, we're going to be looking at how
the episode all about me.
Yeah, we're going to be comparing.
If we ever have to rename the podcast for whatever reason, let's call it that. I think it's a pretty good name.
I actually like that.
Thieves of Joy, yeah.
Gamer's Advocate is good, but Thieves of Joy, a little bit more accurate.
You have to rebrand. Yeah.
Yeah, all of our merch.
Yeah. Oh no.
But when it comes to like comparing one game to another game, all these tattoos. Oh yes, and if you have a suggestion for a tattoo for Banana, we need them in the comments.
If you have a suggestion and are willing to send money to a PO box, we can talk.
Suspiciously, that PO box will be in Europe.
But there's often a game or two that comes out, and in it on its own, maybe pretty good game. I can think of several, not simulator games, but there's games that are in the vein of builder games, basically, that more or less try to do what other games have done in the past, like the Rome games. Caesar games. That's what I meant to say. The Caesar games were so much fun, and they were highly replayable. And you've had a lot of clones in the last 5-6 years trying to do what they did, but it's either they do too much or way too little. They can never really find that sweet spot that Caesar was doing back in the day with Sierra. So it's really hard to say, as Com was bringing up in his description, that sometimes we take away our own joy because it's like, this isn't as good as the game that I liked to play back then, but I can't play that game anymore because it's not supported on modern systems. So it's just, it takes away our joy. So Thief of Joy, I really kind of like that idea and talking about that. So do you guys have any examples off the top of your head about...
I think the most important thing with the idea of the comparison being the Thief of Joy is to just narrow down exactly what this means, where it comes from, and what it's doing. And for me, it tends to be the idea of sequels. Mm-hmm. And there's a strange thought over the years. I remember being a kid, and I remember Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring coming out and being in the theaters and watching that and being really excited. And then I watched the whole movie, and I went back and watched it again with my parents, and I went back and watched it again with a friend. And then it came out on DVD, and I picked that up. And there was always a few months to go before the second movie, and then the third movie would come out after the DVD was released. And I was really excited, and I was really looking forward to it, and I was very curious where they were going to go with it. And there was just that real, yes, let's see, what's next? And I get the same with TV. I remember when Game of Thrones was first running. So we had the first season finished. Holy hell, what are they going to do for the second, then the third, then the fourth? I think gaming is an odd one because we don't always do this. I feel as though gaming, and there's a few series in particular where I feel that it really gets hit. Mass Effect would be one. Civilization would be another. Dragon Age, we talked about before, so I don't really want to get into it because I'm kind of sick of talking about Dragon Age, for goodness sake. But these are games where whenever a new one comes out, we seem to not be excited for it. We seem to not be looking forward to what they're doing. And I feel as though us as fans, we often want to dictate to the studios. Oh, not in any real, true, forceful way. Dictate's probably the wrong word. But we're disappointed that the studios want to develop the game that they want to make, and we want them to develop the game that we want them to make. And when a series decides to iterate, and this is where I think certain series end up being the target of this. Civilization would be one because they try to make each game different from the other. We go into it with the least optimism. And we go into it with a true sense of pessimism and negativity that harms our own ability to enjoy the waiting period for the game coming out, which I think is a big one, because that's really fun, oddly enough. The week before the game comes out, the 2 weeks before it comes out, what's it going to be like? Let's get ready. And it happens just our enjoyment on day one. And we end up in this grand cycle where a new game comes out and we're not happy to see it. And then a few years later, the weird thing is, when the next sequel comes, we're not happy to see that either. Mm-hmm. And it's just an odd thing that I think exists very specifically in gaming. And I don't know why.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that gaming sits in kind of a unique position there where or maybe I have noticed it in other media, but it took a while to get there. So when, more Marvel movies keep coming out, I feel like I'm oversaturated with them and I'm ready to move on. So I'm not as excited about those. But I feel like that happens so much faster with video gaming, and I don't know why. Feels like when, they announce a sequel to a video game I enjoyed, I'm poised to be disappointed, which is not how you approach more content from something you already enjoyed. You're not supposed to be like, oh, I can't wait to hate this. That's a very unhealthy attitude.
That's an odd one, actually. To follow on to the Marvel point, I think it's not quite the same. If you see what I mean, I wonder if with Marvel, you're just oversaturated and there's just too much of it. I don't know if your thought process is, God, I wish the next movie, I don't know what it is. Oh, I wish that was just like Iron Man 1. Or I wish it was just like The Winter Soldier. I wish they just did exactly the same thing as they used to with only a small improvement. I don't think our problem with it is the fact that they change and evolve. It's more the fact that there's just so fucking many that I'm tired of looking at this shit. Which, oddly enough, maybe the exact opposite, in that if they did something completely different, maybe we'd think, oh, finally. Oof, it's about time you did this. Yes. Or maybe not. Just a thought that it might be slightly different.
I think you're definitely right. With Marvel, it feels like always more of the same. And there are so many Marvel movies at this point. And you have competitors with, DC trying to make their own movies as well. There's a lot of superhero content. And then that bleeding into other media to have video games related to Marvel and DC. It's oversaturation at this point. So, that might not be the most accurate comparison. But I do feel like with video games, even when there is significant gaps in development or release dates between entries in a series, I feel like just the announcement that there's another game in that series will get that immediate response of, yeah, I bet it's going to suck. And I don't know why that is.
Well, I just thought of another one. I was wondering if maybe there is a particular series that you think of when you think of this mindset. And another one came to mind for me, which was Elder Scrolls. And it's a really obvious one. We talked about it earlier as well. But I'm sure that we've been around long enough to see that cycle of life that I didn't see when Morrowind was coming out. I think this is the earlier days of widespread adoption of the internet, so we're not going to have the mass amount of people online able and willing to complain about it. It's going to be a more dedicated community at that point. But by the time Oblivion comes out, we already have people raging that the leveling up system isn't like it used to be, and that they've simplified the weapons system. Because I think at that point you stopped having spear skills, for example. You stopped having specific skills. You just had long short swords and short swords or something like that. And we were disappointed that they simplified like that. But then by the time Skyrim comes out, we're annoyed at Skyrim because they've simplified it. Why can't it be more like Oblivion? Remember what Oblivion used to be like, how good that was? And now Skyrim comes out, and we're complaining that they've simplified things and things are different. But now we're waiting for Elder Scrolls 6, and already you can feel wow, I bet it's not going to be as good as Skyrim. And then we look back at how good that game was, and it's just this endless infernal cycle of just, game comes out, bad. We grow to like it, love it. Next game's coming out, I bet it's going to be, game's bad. Mm-hmm. And I don't know where it comes from, and I wonder how much of it might possibly be linked to online culture being based so much around rage. And just that idea of it's much easier to hate something than it is to like it. It's certainly a lot easier to make critical content about a game, to say that you hate it rather than what you like. It's a lot easier. And it's a lot easier to make a title that inspires the clicking. Yeah. If you see what I mean.
Yeah. No, rage baiting is a real thing that actually makes quite a lot of money in platforms like YouTube. They're not interested in teaching you anything. There's no objectivity here. They're simply just trying to get you to find something to plant your flag in and say, no, this is bad, this is wrong. So any variation of that, they can get on board with. So it's like, this one's bad because it's a very
both ways. Like if you have people who agree with you, they'll probably leave a comment like, thank you for finally standing up and talking about this thing I also hate. And then you have people who disagree with you and they'll leave a comment. Fuck you, you're wrong. Rage drives engagement. So I totally get that.
That thrilled me, by the way. Go back and look at the YouTube comments on the Mortismal Gaming review for Veilguard, and then go and look at the ones on the Skill Up review for Veilguard, and just look at the way that these two communities became completely divided, where the people in Mortems are generally quite pro the game, not entirely, but quite pro, and then Skill Ups is this wall of negativity. And it's a weird thing if you go back and watch his review, he's actually not quite as scathing as the comments are. He's scathing, but not as much as they are. It seems that it sort of funnels the faucet of shit hate down into his comment section. But it's bizarre that it's just so different between the two.
Well, when you start off your video, the first 5 minutes or so, with examples that have no context, and they're actually basing it on the limited information you have, and then using that and then later on, I would say, not Mortismal, the other one you mentioned, goes on to say, oh, well, it was more like this. So yes, it was more objective later on, but you didn't start off that way. So you already started the conversation. So
I didn't think his review was bad at all. I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was one of the better ones that I saw. And it was a review that by the end, I just remember thinking, I don't agree with you on it, but I don't think you're particularly wrong about anything. Everything you see, I can see why you feel that way. It makes perfect sense. And the game not being perfect, at times it can actually be pretty bad. And it just so happens a lot of that really stuck with him. But yeah, it really drove the engagement in that video, though, in a way that just shocked me. Well, shocked is too much. It's the internet in 2024. Nothing fucking shocks.
But I think you were, I think you were definitely kind of right in the structure of that video, and I think that structure is almost emblematic of the way the gaming community responds to these. It's very much a visceral, immediate reaction to these games, and that is usually very hateful and kind of critical and problematic, really. And then as people play the games more, as they give them more of a chance, as they learn more about the game, that hateful edge kind of softens and they open up to recognizing things about the game that they actually like. And then you find out that this person who left a scathing review on the release day has put in, 2,400 hours since release and actually grew to love the game. And now they're going to put up another scathing review of the sequel that comes out and then grow to love that game. I think that's weirdly the way the gaming community operates, where their default emotion is hate. And then as they give a game a chance, as they invest in it and kind of get the actual experience that the developers put together for them, they open up and they start to enjoy the game. But they are very, very empowered to share that initial response. And that's where you get a lot of that hateful criticism from. And then that almost becomes kind of the recorded response to a game is, wow, this was not received well, despite the fact that all of these people kept their copies of the game, continued to put hours into it, but they left those terrible reviews up.
The Veilguard one in particular, actually, is just one that really bummed me out because it's become now the received wisdom as well that it was awful, and it really isn't. Again, it's not great. I don't think it's an amazing game. It's still probably the Dragon Age game that I had the most fun with. And I just mean simply fun. It was just, it's fun to do the mage power slam where you slam the staff in the ground, everything goes boom around you. It was really competently made. Yet for some reason the received wisdom now is that the game wasn't even made like competently, technically. Like, as a pure creation, it's really quite something. It's just not a game that...
It didn't have the Cyberpunk launch where it's just unplayable.
No, exactly.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, as far as video games that I've played recently, Veilguard was one of the most well-made in terms of just playing the game. I didn't run into crashes or bugs or game-breaking issues. I just played the game, and it, like Kam was saying, it wasn't, exceptional. It wasn't the greatest game I've ever played, but it was fun, and it worked. And sadly, we've reached a point in video gaming where working is not a guarantee. Yeah.
And this isn't a big thing that we should be praising it for. Like, I'm not trying to say that this is a great thing. Yeah, the game worked. Super duper 7 out of 10. It's not that. It's really just saying that it's a bizarre criticism to say that the game wasn't even working properly, that it was really buggy. Because there's already enough to criticize. There's already enough things we can talk about, so let's just be reasonable about it and give it the props where they're due, and then give it the criticism where they're due. And again, there's plenty of places for it. I did say I didn't want to talk about Veilguard anymore, and I dragged us down here. I'm sorry.
So about Mass Effect Andromeda.
It's still BioWare.
Baby steps, Kam. Baby steps.
The lack of third-party software isn't in Veilguard. It's in every single game that comes out that's a AAA title. And they said, no, we're not going to put any third-party software. They did that as a gesture of good faith, and that just got lost with all the other things. And it's like, guys, I mean...
The fact that I don't have a stupid BioWare launcher on my computer, thank you. Thank you, BioWare. And fuck you, everyone else.
Unlike Red Dead 2, who is a well-beloved game, and deservedly so, I have to pretty much have a Rockstar launcher to launch it from Steam. Which is ridiculous.
I cannot get L.A. Noire to run. I've never been able to get it to run on my PC, just with the launcher. It just glitches out. And it's a shame, because apparently it's amazing. But I can't play it.
I really enjoyed L.A. Noire.
Yeah, I heard wonderful things about it.
It's a really good game. It's kind of long for me, but yeah. I hate disparaging long games. I know Com brought that up as a possible topic we may go over. But
more accurate to say it's a bit slow at times.
Yeah, that's what I really heard about it.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone ever played a game back on the PlayStation that was called The Getaway, which was a sort of UK Grand Theft Auto, and it ended up playing a lot more like a film. If you've seen Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, something like that, it played out more like a gangster movie in the sense of you weren't typically driving in the street, crashing over everything like a sandbox. It was you left your base where your mission was going to be given to you. You got in the car, a lot of dialogue on the way. You just drove through the streets. You just drove. You followed the streets and you followed the map and you drove and you just got there. You didn't do jumps, nothing like that. And just 10 minutes later, you arrived at the site and did your mission. It was this slow, very deliberate pace through the game, which was honestly really welcome. A really interesting thing. And I heard L.A. Noire was fairly similar.
Yeah.
It was a big world, but it wasn't a sandbox.
I could be honest, I was kind of hoping you were going to tell me that, like, you get to the place where you're doing your mission and everything goes horribly wrong, just like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. But unfortunately, no.
I haven't seen that movie in so many years. I'd love to watch it again.
I've rewatched it within the last year. It is still wonderful. I am a huge fan.
I rewatched Snatch about 6 months ago. That holds up. I liked it as much as Lock, Stock, but it holds up. So I've got high hopes for Lock, Stock, Two Smoking Barrels. Then if you saw the film Shallow Grave, which was from a very similar time, bold, widespread recommendation. Anyone watch the movie Shallow Grave. I think it's actually out of print and there is a copy on YouTube. So it's probably there. Maybe go check it out.
But there's a couple of different ways that we could look at that too, as far as like
games, yeah.
So if we look at like what you were mentioning before, like follow up to series, that's definitely a way to not look forward to something because maybe the prior version just didn't meet our expectations or something. So like, oh, you're gonna make another version of the thing I don't like anymore. I get that, but there's also the comparison between different series. So for instance, like Civilization, Humankind wasn't the best game, but it can't help itself to be, often referred to. It's not Civilization, because even Civilization within the series sometimes gets like, it's not I don't like Civilization 6 because it wasn't enough like Civilization 4, which was, had its, best moments of Civilization or whatever. And so that's almost like the perfect situation where you have like a series compared to itself and compared to other ones. And those other ones don't really have a chance because they're trying to do something unique, but they're so similar in what they do that you can't help but criticize it for not being that other game.
I wonder if that's part of the issue we see with kind of modern games is there is so much similarity and people kind of attempting to copy what has worked for other development studios and other games. Like look at Marvel Rivals and Overwatch. The gameplay is almost identical. It really does seem like, Marvel is just trying to bite into the market share that Overwatch had. And it's working, but the game we got is a game we already had, really, just reskinned with Marvel. And I have long since moved away from Overwatch, so I don't really have a dog in that fight. I don't really have the data to provide any meaningful analysis. But I wonder if that's part of why we see this kind of tendency to comparison is because we have so many things that are kind of deliberately copying other successful games in the hope to kind of leverage that previous success with a new IP.
And it also works in reverse. Sometimes, like Path of Exile, for instance, supposed to be basically a Diablo clone. Right now, the community is very much on the side of Path of Exile and has abandoned Diablo. But Diablo kind of almost did it to itself through its series because, it had obviously for me, the best one of all time, Diablo 2. And I'll have people that argue, say, no, it was the original Diablo was better. That's not, whatever. That's an opinion. That's fine.
Those people are wrong.
Yeah, they're wrong. But Diablo 2 does a lot of things just perfectly right. And there's a grind there. And they abandoned that in Diablo 3. And then Diablo 4 had its launch that was more recent. I won't go into the details of that. But then they actually tried to make it more like Diablo 3 because then the community was arguing about it so much. So it's kind of weird. So Path of Exile said, we'll step in, we'll do the right thing. And they do a lot of good things, a lot of right things, but they found out pretty quick that they can't do everything. And that's why their development has slowed on it. But to be fair, like I said, sometimes that works in reverse. You can kind of get yourself stuck in the mud and another developer says, okay, we'll fill in. So it's dangerous.
Well, Path of Exile had an advantage there in that they already had an established IP as well. I mean, we go all the way back to about 2015, earlier, maybe, I don't know. So I think they'd already managed to establish themselves as existing outside of that Diablo world. So I don't know if we still refer to it as a Diablo-like even. It almost feels like its own game, its own series. And the one that I think would be possibly a more pertinent example would be something like Cities Skylines. Because that's such a specific type of game, such a specific genre, that I couldn't have imagined really existing outside of SimCity. And we'd always had these smaller simulation and construction games, things like Transport Tycoon, Roller Coaster Tycoon, Constructor. And a lot of these games, they had something that was quite specific. So Constructor, you played as this sort of strong-arming, semi-illegal enterprise trying to do all sorts of works around the town. Roller Coaster Tycoon, of course, specifically the parks. Transport Tycoon, focusing on your networks. And then you had SimCity, which is always just doing its own thing. And then City Skyline came in, doing something no one else really was ever doing. No one was trying to challenge SimCity on the throne there. It was almost as though that was the spot given for the king. And it was this divine right almost, that spot belonged to them. And City Skylines sort of appears as this young usurper. And I can remember people whinging that what are they name? It's not Paradoxis. What's that studio called?
I think that's right.
Hold on.
Paradox.
Paradox?
I think it is. I'll look it up.
Yeah, I've got to look it up. Give me a second. I'm so sorry. City Skylines, Paradox Interactive. I can remember people complaining that they were wasting their time making a game like this because we don't normally associate that with Paradox. I'm just double checking the games they did. It was, the Grand Strategy. It was Hearts of Iron. It was Europa Universalis. It was Crusader Kings. Why are they wasting their time doing this when we want that? We don't want our studio doing new things. We want them doing that. And it was almost, we were annoyed that we weren't going to get the game that we wanted, which was another Hearts of Iron, another Europa Universalis, which we eventually got anyway. But why are they wasting their time on this, doing this, when they don't do this? And then oddly enough, that became now the defining game of that genre. Especially because it was so well timed with SimCity having released their massively multiplayer version just a year or two prior, which really did the proverbial lead balloon. That just absolutely blew up in their faces.
But to go along with exactly what you're saying, City Skylines 2, not beloved.
I forgot that existed until you just said that.
So it checked all those boxes.
I probably put 10 hours into it.
Oh, it's not much, is it?
Didn't click for me.
Yeah. What SimCity was great about that is that you could actually build, a good city and have fun with that. And it was a bit quirky. You had the newspaper and you had like these weird headlines and it was a bit fun and it was a little comical at the same time, whereas City Skylines is all business. It's the suit and tie version of SimCity. So you have to really, really want to build something in City Skylines. That's what never really clicked for me. I liked a little bit of the zaniness.
Well, that's a game that almost knows its audience, doesn't it? I think it realizes there is a big crowd out there who want those simulations. And we talked about it before. The kind of simulation that you can do in your everyday life, things like Power Wash. I can go and Power Wash right now if I really want to. We need to make the game very gamey, just so we got something to enjoy. If you've got dishwasher simulator or dishwashing simulator, it's going to have to be really quick. You haven't got to really worry about getting every last bit of grime off. It's just got to be a quick whoop, 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 done, whoop, 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 done.
Yeah.
But
Barbecue
a game
simulator
that's
is very much not just flipping a burger on the grill. You can urinate on a co-op player. That's a thing.
and that's what we want, because we can go and do that in real life. Like, obviously, the urinating bit we might have to rethink, but we can go and do that job in real life.
You really got to choose your co-op partner for that.
Yeah, the VR version of that is crazy.
Well, we're moving on from that. But something like City Skylines,
There
you're
is
so
no
unlikely.
VR version of that. Someone just peed on Legion.
Well, don't piss on me and tell me it's raining. The City Skylines, you're so unlikely to become a city planner in real life who's actually going to have this power. So they have a space for you to actually make a game that's more simulation-y. One where you do have to consider, okay, is the sewage plant down water from the drinking water? That sort of stuff. We have to really make sure that the game is, you have to consider people's traffics and commuting routes. You've got to worry about the infrastructure. And it just creates that more simulation-y game rather than just the playing game that you would get from something like, a Power Wash simulator. I cannot remember how we got to this topic.
So I think one of the things that you touched on in your rant, as we've decided we're calling them, was the idea of these kind of kings sitting atop their throne. So SimCity kind of being in that position, and then a lot of us just kind of accepting like, oh, that's the definitive game in that role, and kind of deterring other developers from trying to compete with that. And now I feel like we've almost gone too far in the opposite direction, where you have FromSoft, who is dominating in the games that they make. That there is a Souls-like genre at this point, because people are trying to imitate what FromSoft captured with Dark Souls and Elden Ring and Bloodborne and Sekiro. Now we have almost this oversaturation of the market with Souls-like games, where you all end up playing essentially a ripoff of Dark Souls, and being like, well, this sucks. It's not. They did a lot of the things that Dark Souls did worse than Dark Souls. They're just trying to cut into the market. And then you look at games like Valheim. And Valheim, I'm going to be honest, I was very excited about. I still enjoy it. But there are so many games that came out very similar to Valheim that have done a lot more than Valheim did. And now we're kind of almost seeing that oversaturation with those kind of base builder survival progression games with that co-op element included. And I'm not sure where the happy balance is, but like, I don't want one King of the Throne just sitting there being untouchable, but I also don't want 300 challengers of varying quality. So I don't know what the meaningful takeaway is from that, but like, if you're gonna challenge the king, be good. Don't challenge them with, weak sauce. Make sure your game has something that makes it a viable challenger.
Well, it's where you want to find the line where the person on the throne is almost making everyone around them better. It's not that they get so far ahead that the rest aren't really challengers, or they just end up surrounded by complete dross. You want to have them in a position where people are then building on top of that, so that the throne is always in this case of jeopardy, where we can't decide actually which game is the one that best defines the genre right now. And maybe a good example of that would be something like the RPGs coming out of Japan in the 90s, where you did have multiple series, particularly within Japan, more than worldwide, that you had Final Fantasy, which could very easily and quickly be replaced by the next Dragon Quest game that came out. And then you had games like Legend of Dragoon, or you had some games that played with the system a bit differently, like Vandal Hearts. And you always had these different challenges that were just pushing and fighting to see which one was on the top. And I think they made themselves better. They made each other better, in the way that in music, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Beach Boys made each other better because they always wanted to one-up what the other person did. It wasn't just that they were using the systems, they weren't just taking things from the others and doing a version of it. They were looking at what the other company did, or in that case, the other bands did, and thinking, how can we do that better? Mm-hmm. How can we become the best? And that's what something like Cities Skyline seems to have done. On the other hand, the million of games that play like Dark Souls, a lot of them don't. They seem to pretty much do what Dark Souls does, in which case I want the original. I don't want your diet version of it.
Exactly.
And it's so omnipresent that recently, in the last few weeks, I've been playing... It's my very first Tales game. I've been playing Tales of Arise on the PS5. Don't know why I had to drop in the console there, but we will take sponsorships. And whilst playing it, the combat feels odd because it's not Souls-like. And I'm so fucking used to that now in every damn game I play that it feels weird that I'm not dodge rolling with circle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a peculiar feeling. Like, why does this suddenly feel wrong? Well, it's because everything does what Souls does.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the issue of where games suffer from being expected to create a new version every year. And now specifically, we went over this in sports games, but like you have the show that comes out every year for MLB. You have the Madden that comes out every year. And they're not much different from year to year because, I mean, think about it logically. I mean, the developers are making the same game every year, but in conjunction with that, there's a soccer version or football, European football. And,
yeah, that's famous for the accent we use.
And then, of course, you have the show and things like that. So they're all doing this every year because they kind of have to. I think they kind of.
To be fair, that is a developer choice.
Yeah,
I don't know that there is the audience saying, "Oh, I need Madden to come out every year if it's going to be the same game next year."
It's a developer choice, but it's because they like making money because they sell every year. So it's almost required for them to do it because they have a budget based on the assumption of sales in every year.
Bizarrely, it feels different to me, though. I agree with you. It's actually ultimately the same principle, but it feels not quite the same topic to me. It's a purely gut feeling thing than people who didn't want Dragon Age 4 to be like, who wanted Dragon Age 4 to be more like 3 or Mass Effect 3 to be more like 2, whatever it might be. Even though it is clearly the same idea. It just feels different.
This is just me throwing it out to the ether, but if they'd never put a year on there, like if they just said Madden, EA Madden, and just it doesn't have a year on there, then we could actually say like 3 years later, here's a better version. It's EA Madden. The newest Madden's come out.
On that note, Football Manager, so the big management game, the simulation game, actually, that's huge, particularly in Europe, they've just cancelled the next one. So Football Manager 2025 has been cancelled, and they're going to just work on 2026. So they're actually taking a year out for a fucking change.
That's exactly what I feel like they should do in these other games. And I feel like that's why when a game isn't significantly different from its predecessor in other genres, it feels so disappointing, is because they took the time to develop a whole new game and then they didn't do enough with that time. Whereas, with Madden or the show, every year they're coming out with it. They have a tight development window, and that's understandable. But at the same time, they're releasing a game that didn't really need to be made.
Yeah.
So I have that criticism, but I think fans of those series will be like, yeah, I can understand it not needing to be that different from year to year. Whereas I'm on the other side to say, if it's not that different, don't release a new game.
But I think that's ultimately why it feels different to the examples we were using earlier of things like Civilization or Dragon Age or whatever. And it really is because I think ultimately we all agree it doesn't have to be this often, and we all agree we don't really need the new one. Just some of us are more willing to say, yeah, we don't really need 2025 when we got 2024, but it's only $60 or whatever. So I think, yeah, that's the real difference. Whereas you have fandoms with games like Civilization, Dragon Age, where we've waited a few years for the next game. You've got the fandom divided into that group who are, okay, let's see what comes out. I'm kind of excited for this. And then the ones who are more attached to the past ones and wish that the new game wasn't changing in the way that it was.
Yeah, and I think taken as a whole, when we look at series and how developers are doing this, like some are doing it year to year based on the titles, and some are doing it every so often to create a better version of the previous title. I think it all kind of gets meshed together in our heads, and we get a little jaded, like, okay, it's another of this series. Great. Mm-hmm. I didn't know we really needed it. And, so I think even though they're not the same, just like you said, it feels different, but they're technically not. But I think in the bigger picture, like I said, in the gaming scope, that we just see it as another series, and it's like, great. So it just becomes jaded initially just because it's filled in with all these other titles that do it annually for no good reason. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I would imagine that something like the FIFA's coming out every year, the UFC's coming out every 2-3 years, the Madden's coming out every year. I'd imagine that does go some way to having an effect on the way that we view all games. Because it just reinforces every time that you see that new release, you think, oh yeah, this ultimately just is a business. This ultimately just is, we need more money this quarter for the shareholders, etc. And then it lends you to having a more cynical, widespread worldview over the whole industry. So that all of a sudden you start thinking, oh, do we really need that sequel to that one game? Do we really need that? And just alters the way that you view the entire business. And it's a strange thought. But I think gaming is viewed so negatively by the gamers, often myself included. This isn't a shot being thrown out at other people, this is myself included. It's bizarre how little we like the gaming world. We just like some of the games we play, but we dislike almost everything about how they're made, the way the industry works. And this would be wide-ranging. This would be how much we care about the people who go and make these games for us and the fact they're not getting paid enough. It's going to be the games coming out far too often when they're not actually needed. It's going to be things like the copy protection that we don't agree should be a thing. It's going to be games being lost to the past because it's not cost-effective to keep them going. And there's so much of this that goes on that it just poisons the way we look at everything, and we can't help but approach every new game that comes out with just a little drop of cynicism that we don't really need to have, but we're almost driven to have by the world that we live in.
And gamers and I say this very, very broadly, but we need to be careful, because when we start saying, I don't want that, I want the version that it was, I like the games that I like, and exactly what you just said, that's why when game developers take risks, we punish them for it. So going back to Veilguard, they took some risks by saying, we're going to do this with this character, we're going to do that with that thing, or maybe the gameplay isn't going to work, but we're going to try. We're going to see if this sticks somehow. And developers that don't take risks, that's why we get games that stagnate. That's why we don't get titles that don't seem like they're worth their value, the money that we pay for. because they don't take those risks. And so we shouldn't be punished so quick to punish them is what I'm saying.
Well, let me just throw a couple out there. There's Veilguard, which I'm glad they took the risk. I didn't need Inquisition again because Inquisition's still there if I want it. I didn't need 2 again because it's still there, etc. I'm glad the one I always use is the Final Fantasy remakes. I'm glad they did something different because the original's there. It doesn't change anything about that. And maybe something new will come out of that series that then another game production studio might see and think, oh shit, that's good. What can we do to build on that? And we keep the ball rolling and we keep games developing and being different through every generation. And that's what we want. We want these games to be getting better. And this is why gamers and fans don't know fuck about game development, myself included, because we just want what we already got. We want what we like. But we need people out there who are going to say, no, you don't. You need something different. Yeah. Kojima would never have made Death Stranding if he was listening to us. Never. And I'm glad he didn't, because he did make it. Resident Evil 5, they tried something different. It's not great. Resident Evil 6, they tried something different. It's not great. Resident Evil 7, they tried something different. It's fucking awesome. Like, sometimes you miss. But it's better that they tried.
I think that ties back to our kind of knee-jerk response discussion earlier, where we were talking about how gamers seem very quick to hate a new release. And it's something we've mentioned on the podcast before, but I don't want that initial hatred to deter developers from taking risks. Because when we see something that's new, everybody is going to be like, I know what I liked 10 years ago and this isn't it. Therefore, I must hate this. And that's just not the case. You have to give it a chance. And we see that immediate reaction to a lot of these games that try something new. And it's not a fair assessment. And it's possible that you do actually hate the new things that are going on in your games.
Yeah. Resident Evil 5
you're
sucks.
You're not going to decide that after playing for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And you're also not going to decide that based on reviews that you read around the release of a game. So I think ultimately the big takeaway for me for this discussion is when you are looking at a game and you are trying to determine what it is you like about it and what it is you don't like about it. One, that is a very personal thing, and it's probably not in your best interest to let the opinions of others color your opinion of a game. Try to figure out what it is specific to you that this game isn't delivering on, and that should be your criticism. And you really need to give the game a chance when you're playing it, to not go in with that cynicism, not go in with that determined to find something you don't like, and not go in with that expectation of it being the previous game in a series. And I think that last one is where a lot of us struggle. I know I struggle with that because I do have my favorite games, and those games are parts of series that continue to this day. So when I get a new entry in that series and it doesn't do the things that I liked about my favorite entry in that series, I'm going to be a little disappointed. But I have to recognize that they've already done that. That thing that I liked about my favorite game, that's in my favorite game. It doesn't need to be in every other game. They've done it. It's been accomplished. We can move on. And maybe they'll find something that is even better than what I liked about my favorite game. Maybe they won't, but I have to give them a chance.
And I think it's really the same sort of two things with me. The big point that I have with gaming now is that, and this is an odd one, but it's so true. I love gaming. I think it's amazing, and I want to enjoy it when I do it. So I try to go into every game, and this will soften my critical blinkers a little bit, but I go into every game thinking, I really hope this is fun. Let's go, let's see what you've got for me, and let's see what the game's going to be. And it definitely does soften, so I don't go into a game very often and hate it because I've gone in wanting to give it the benefit of the doubt because I want to have fun. But when it comes to game development, we have to take the good with the bad so that we can get something that's new and interesting. The price we might have to pay for new and interesting games is the fact that we're going to get new shit games. We're going to get games where they try to do something fun and interesting and actually it's just kind of crap. And that's the price we're going to have to pay. as we put all these games out there. Some are going to be good, some are going to be bad. But if the heart and soul of the developer is in there, it deserves our respect, at least to the point that we should go into it with good faith and see if there's anything within these games that they've got to offer for us. And if it turns out to be shit, it turns out to be shit. On the other hand, it might be Outer Wilds. On the other hand, it might be something really interesting.
I think there's I forget what the name of it is. There's a screenwriting guide, and I think it's like Screenwriter's Guide to, or Screenwriting for Fun and Profit, and the word fun is crossed out. And it's basically a guideline to sell your screenplay. And it basically boils down, the last 30 years of movies to a formula. And this is how you sell a screenplay that's going to get your movie made. And it's how you end up with formulaic bullshit that nobody actually cares about. They just shut off their brain for 90 minutes and they pay for a ticket or whatever it is. I don't want that for video gaming. I don't need shovelware. I don't need that crap that is just copy and paste. And the way you get that crap is by shitting on everything that's new. So I wholly support the idea of going into every game with an open mind to say that I hope this is fun. I don't need it to be something I've already experienced. And like I said, I'm guilty of that too. I am not going into every video game thinking, I hope this is something fun and new. Sometimes I'm going into it hoping, I hope they brought in all of my favorite things from previous games and somehow found a way to inject new stuff on top of that, even though I know that's somewhat impossible. How do you take everything I loved from a video game and then build a new video game that is somehow not disappointing? I don't think it's a possibility.
So my last point on this is, I'm a big Mass Effect fan, and obviously with the N7.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a shocker.
But going back to what we said before with this,
the Mass Effect hoodie.
Yeah. Well, going back as far
presumably in the last few minutes at some point we have heard some Mass Effect music in the podcast. And Leaving Earth is our intro?
Yeah. So if you look at what we talked about earlier with the rage baiting and stuff like that, so there's a difference in trying to get somebody to see your philosophy and your idea where you think that gamers should be wanting their games to go, those type of things. It's harder to do nowadays. And then there's like people like myself who love Mass Effect to death, played Andromeda when it came out, tried to play Andromeda when it first came out, I should say, and found all these flaws with it. But I still encourage people, because they tell me, like, oh, Andromeda wasn't that bad. Well, that's fine. You didn't. Okay, that's fine. But if you've never played it, I still encourage you. Go play it. Go find out for yourself. You may not agree with me at all, but how do we have that discussion if you've never played it? I have a myriad of reasons why the game is not any good, but I will never discourage people from playing it. That's the difference in what you'll see. You'll get a lot of people like, oh, you don't want to ever play this game. You don't ever want to pollute your mind with whatever crap that the studio's putting out. I'm glad BioWare's, going down because they made Andromeda. What the hell kind of conversation are you having with these people? Or what are you trying to tell them? So, and again, they're just rage baiting you into clicking on their stuff. They're self-centered. They're not thinking about you or your ability to find pleasure in a game that you might actually enjoy. They're not interested in that.
The joy that I've seen, it hasn't been on dedicated subreddits. It tends to be more into the more general Reddits, things like gaming, rather than Dragon Age, for example. To see the amount of posts with joy at the developers losing jobs when it comes to things like Dragon Age bums me the fuck out. It's already an industry where it's really hard to get in. It's an industry where people aren't paid what they should be. It's an industry which is seeing cuts. And we're happy because you didn't like a game that there's more and more people getting out of it. That fucking blows. It's really awful.
And I think we, the three of us specifically, we have our video game series, our favorites, where we talk about them, and we'll talk about entries in that series and how disappointing they were. And I think we run the risk that Legion was just talking about of coming across in a way that's like, oh, you should never play this. This is a terrible game. I hate it, so you should hate it too. And I think for each of us, we all know each other well enough to know that's not the case. When I shit talk Final Fantasy VIII, I still think people should play the game. When I shit talk Final Fantasy X too, I still think people should play the game. I hate those games within the context of the Final Fantasy series, which I love to death. So those are games that I think are good games in a series of excellent games, and that's why I hate them.
Yeah, the stuff that I will say don't play is if it's broken, genuinely, or if I think there's some sort of predatory aspect to it. That I'm not going to be in. That I will happily say don't. But the rest, you should probably try.
The only games that I would genuinely say don't play are games, story-focused games where the story is terrible. And it just leads nowhere, or it has a terrible message to it, which that's a pretty uncommon occurrence, but it exists. Overwhelmingly, I think even the games that I hate, if you can enjoy them, that's awesome for you. Ultimately, the only thing I get out of hating a game is fewer things that I enjoy. So really, the only person who should be suffering from that is me. Nobody else should ever take my opinion and go, well, I'm not going to even give this game a chance because Banana said it's crap. Banana's wrong all the time. Just, if I tell you I hate a game, go play it just to prove me wrong.
Self-aware Banana.
Yeah.
If you hate the podcast, make sure you subscribe so you can hear more things that you'll hate. Give the video a like. Give it a thumbs down if you don't like it. Give it a thumbs down. That's okay too. We are also on Spotify.
It'll sting, but it's okay.
Yeah, we'll get over it.
No, we won't.
So, but come on.
No,
we're on Spotify, Amazon, and help me out.
iTunes.
iTunes. Okay, yeah. And so check us out there. If you
help me out, not like that.
Yeah, not like that. Try it again. Anyway.
Apple Music.
Apple Music, something. Anyway, we will check you guys later. And till next time, bye-bye.